Now, the head of the Muslim World League is warning that the conflict in Gaza is fueling division and extremism here in Great Britain. Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Karim Al Issa says that both Muslims and non-Muslims should focus instead on domestic issues of shared concern, as a political situation outside should not interfere with integration inside. Well, we can now speak with the social policy analyst, Dr. Rakib Ehsan. Rakib, welcome to the show. Always a pleasure. This data came out. I find it simply astonishing that less than 10% of young British Muslims aged 18 to 24 viewed Britain as a tolerant country. That means 90% think Britain is intolerant. 50% of Muslims aged under 25 are growing ever more disillusioned and alienated as a result of foreign wars. Rakib, my question is simple. This is desperate reading. Why is it, though, that young British Muslims seem to be getting further disenfranchised and further segregated than their parents?
Well, Martin, I think what we're seeing when it comes to our British Muslim communities is what can be called the integration paradox. Now, UK born and raised British Muslims, compared to many of their foreign-born elders, they're more integrated socially, educationally, and economically. But the risk is that it also increases the chances of perceiving forms of discrimination, injustice and unfairness. Now, we can have a debate about how legitimate those concerns are, but that seems to be what's going on. And I think what's really interesting is you saw some polling that came out recently, which was conducted by Whitestone Whitestone Insight on behalf of the Institute for the Impact of Faith in Life. And it showed that it was actually younger British Muslims who are more likely to identify as Muslim first and foremost. So what we're seeing in the UK is not so much an integration miracle, but an integration paradox. And some people might say that we're actually going backwards when it comes to integration.
Yeah, I think paradox is a flattering term. It would seem like an integration failure. We are going backwards. The data says it. This is from a respected Islamic scholar. This is not some far-right conspiracy theory. This is the scores on the doors, and it quite simply shows that the integration experiment is failing. Why?
Well, I think that what you make a really interesting point here, but that the fact that this intervention was from the Muslim World League. And I think what's really interesting for me is that when you look at some of the more sensible and practical interventions when it comes to integration problems in modern Britain, they're not coming from within Britain. They're coming from what some people say the Islamic world, countries in the Middle East and also North Africa, who are very familiar with the problem of radical Islamism. And we've seen countries such as the UAE, for example, add UK-based groups to their local terror list. You have countries like Morocco, who back in 2017 banned the manufacturing, marketing and sale of the burqa, the full face veils. And so some people might even argue that if there is a country that's a bit of a soft touch when it comes to Islamist extremism, it might well be the UK.
And Rakib, I want to ask you this question. No doubt people go, oh, you know, it's racism, it's oppression, it's a lack of opportunity. What about the Muslim community taking some responsibility here? Because if we're going backwards in terms of young people feeling less British, feeling less integrated, feeling less accepted, it should be a two-way street, right? Sure, the Muslim community should be trying to do something about that too.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think that when there are problems within communities, there has to be a degree of responsibility taken by members of those communities as well. And I think that even though there may be young British Muslims who are incredibly frustrated and indeed disillusioned with the British political establishment's positioning on Israel-Palestine, I think there has to be a recognition that for all of the UK's flaws, it still remains one of the best places to live as a Muslim, considerable religious freedoms, anti-discrimination protections on the grounds of religion. And I think that if you actually look at other European economies, our market economy actually tailors in terms of the provision of goods and services very well when it comes to providing those services and products for British Muslim communities. And I think we need to bear that in mind as well.
Would this suggest to you, and I hate to use this word, would this suggest that there's a hatred for Britain? Amongst certain parts of this community, they just seem to view Britain with total contempt.
I don't think that's an unreasonable view. I think we shouldn't exaggerate that specific problem, but I think there's a section of the British Muslim population. There's no doubt about that, and I think you can see that by the fact that the MI5's wider terror-related watch list is dominated by would-be jihadists. So I think that very clearly shows that there is a section of the British Muslim population that does hold Britain in contempt. And I think that has certainly worsened. I'd really stress this point. I think that has worsened with the British political establishment, I would say, perceived lack of solidarity with the Palestinian cause and the ongoing conflict in the Middle East.
Dr. Rakib Ehsan, sobering stuff. Thank you for joining us. Always a pleasure to have your company. Thank you very much for joining us today on GB News. Wow.